Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 16 Pro Max has been out for about 3 months at this point. It's already been about 90 days since the initial launch of the iPhone 16 Pro Max, and this has been my main device. This is what I've used every single day other than reviewing a couple other phones. I thought we'd talk about 10 different things I've noticed while using it over the past 90 days or so, everything from scratches and durability to camera control and the overall updates and how they've made the phone a little bit better to use since its initial launch. Now, the first thing is the overall design. I appreciate the design, but going back to the iPhone 12, it just feels so old and squared off, yet somehow familiar. I think the overall design is getting a little bit dated, and it would be great to see a change next year with the iPhone 17, but it's definitely familiar and been improved upon with the iPhone 16 Pro Max. With the 15 Pro Max, they introduced the titanium frame, and the only negative I see from this is basically the colors that they're offering. Maybe due to the overall coating on the frame, it's harder to offer different colors, but we only have a few different basic colors. With black titanium that I have here, we have desert titanium and silver, as well as natural titanium. So we don't really have any colors such as the product red that we've had in the past with the iPhone XR or anything like that. I would love to see a reintroduction of maybe more colorful phones, and I'm not sure why Pro can't be a colorful phone. Many people put cases on it anyway, but either way, I think they should update that. Now, one of the things I've noticed this year is the phone seems to be more durable in some ways and less in others. The overall coating seems to be holding up pretty well, but I've noticed small scratches here and there just from using it. You'll see there's a small one on the finish right there, and if I flip the phone over, the coating around the camera isn't holding up that well. So this is just from setting it down on a table, placing it there, and using it day to day. Overall, the bottom is holding up fine, and everything else is holding up fine, and I don't have any scratches or anything on the camera, but you'll see the overall finish is scuffed off of it just from setting it down on a table or setting it down in front of me. Wherever I'm at, I typically will just set it on whatever's in front of me that's a softer surface. I won't place it on a hard surface typically. And I have noticed that the glass seems to be more durable this year. Overall, it's held up incredibly well. Let me turn off the wallpaper for the always-on display. And if we turn off the wallpaper so we can see the display a little bit better, you'll notice there's almost zero scratches on my phone. And the reason I say almost is there's one I noticed just a week or so ago right there by my finger. Now, this is great though compared to what we've seen in the past. Compared to what we have on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, we have scratches all over it. Fingerprints, of course, but scratches all over it, and just from normal use. Now, of course, I could use a screen protector and keep it safe that way, but I just prefer the overall feel of the phone without it, and the thinness and the size of it without a screen protector or a case. However, one thing I do work on protecting is my personal information and identity with today's video sponsor, Incogni. Finding someone's personal information online has become increasingly simple and can reveal personal information you don't really want others to know. There are data brokers trying to gather as much information about you as possible, with whole teams dedicated to gathering and selling your personal information. Incogni helps remove your personal data online so it can no longer be exploited by data brokers and others. Within minutes of signing up for Incogni with my own information such as email addresses, home addresses, and phone numbers, Incogni identified 10 websites and had already sent removal requests. Now, after months of using it, they've sent 378 requests, they've already completed 339, and there's 39 in progress. When Incogni has successfully verified removal, you can see everything done in your activity list. You'll see progress, completed, all in a nice graph, and you'll see suppression list entries as well. You'll see the completion log below that, and when I've tried to remove this data myself, it can take hours. Incogni does that work for you, saving a ton of time, and I genuinely recommend you try it out and get all of your information out of others' hands and back into your own. They've saved me over 254 hours. To try it out for yourself risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee, check out the link in the description and use the code ZOLOTECH to get 60% off an annual plan. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Now, Apple has improved things such as 5G and Wi-Fi connectivity with the latest updates. Now, this is not the case for everyone, but it's definitely the case for me. You'll see I have 4 bars of signal where I'm currently at, and that can go up and down depending on weather, cell signal strength, different towers that might have issues or more, but in general it's been fairly fast. In fact, I would say it's even better than I had at the start. If we go to speed tests, we can measure this quickly, and you'll see with 5G UC, the overall speed varies, but I've had this over 400 megabits per second where I am now, and well over 1,000 if I drive just about a mile from here. I've used this when we had loss of internet during a hurricane, and uploaded videos using my phone's hotspot when I had over 40 megabits per second up. Actually, I had about 200 at one point. So just depending where you are, how strong the overall signal is, I've really had no issues with this phone. It seems to be much better than even last year's phone that way for me. And the same is true with Wi-Fi. Now that, of course, depends on your carrier, but Wi-Fi has been great. I haven't had any issues connecting to it, and it seems to be a pretty reliable connection. This, of course, can depend on your Wi-Fi router as well, but in general, I've actually had no issues with it. When it comes to the camera control, this is something that I'm not sure Apple should have added. I think it's okay that it's there, and it's improved over time with different features with iOS 18.2, for example, where you have the option to press and hold, and you can lock auto exposure and autofocus, but it's something I find that I rarely use other than just opening the camera. I could have done that before with the action button, and I typically find that I use the controls still in the camera itself to utilize the actual photo taking. And the reason for that is when I find that I take a photo just by clicking, I typically shake the phone more than if I just tap the screen and I can get the shot that I was looking for. So overall, I think it's a great camera, but I don't think that the button is really justified. It may be something people like an awful lot, but it's something I find I don't really use. Now, speaking of the cameras are phenomenal this year, especially for video. Of course, we have 4K 60, 4K 120 this year as well, where we can record at full speed, full quality, and we really have no issues with overheating or anything else. I've used this extensively for video throughout the year, and it's been really great since I've had it. No issues with autofocus. Anytime you see me record outside, it's typically with an iPhone 16 Pro Max. Yes, the phone will get hot when you're recording, but I've never had it to the point where it overheats and shuts off the display and says it needs to cool down. So it's done a great job. Of course, that's in lower ambient temperatures, but overall it's been pretty great. When it comes to the display this year, well, it's pretty much the same as last year. However, it does go down to 1 Hertz, so if you want to utilize that in a dim environment, it works just fine. However, I typically have it on auto brightness, and I'll bring it up just a little bit as that's pretty hard to see in the dimmest of environments or darkest of environments. I really still enjoy the standby mode that we had that was added last year, where you can just place the phone on here when it's charging, lock it, and then we have a clock that will show up. So it takes a second, and then we can sort of swipe through the different options and utilize a clock with standby mode and notifications. So that's something I appreciate, along with the always-on display. Apple's always been great at having pretty decent displays. It's very color accurate, and I have no issues whatsoever with it. It's great outside in a very bright environment, no problem seeing it. And again, it's super bright this year. It's not as bright as some competitors. We're seeing very high ratings with over 3,000 nits with different manufacturers, but it's great for an iPhone, and I've still, again, had no issues outside. I don't find that it dims in the hot situations. Maybe in the very hottest of environments, in the sun, it would pull the brightness down a little bit, but I really don't see that throughout most of the year. It's only when it's very hot outside. When it comes to PWM or pulse width modulation and the way it controls brightness, this does have it, but it doesn't typically bother my eyes. It's very similar to what we had with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So if that phone bothered your eyes, this one will. But it's only about 1 in 10 people, myself included, and sometimes it can give you eye strain, cause headaches, or sometimes make you feel nauseated. But in this case, I really don't have that issue. Even though it's not the highest rate that we've seen out there, it seems to be just fine. So as you can see, under a faster shutter speed, you can actually see the phone refreshing the display, but overall, it's hard to capture even at 240 frames per second. So this shouldn't bother your eyes if you have an issue with that for most people. When it comes to the speakers, I've had no issues. They sound pretty great, and I haven't had any issues with the speakers rattling. They've held up well, and they still have a nice stereo sound. Whether you're watching a video, such as one of my videos, we'll go into this one here that I just published. So if you have music, we'll go up to about 86 decibels or so. It goes nice and loud, stays clear at those loud volumes. However, at the very peak volumes, it does muffle the sound a little bit, but that's pretty typical of any speaker in any phone. But overall, it does a great job. There's great stereo sound, and I have no complaints with that. When it comes to the overall speed and performance, that's where phones are great today. They're super fast with the A18 Pro, and I've shown benchmarks in many other videos, but you'll see we have 8 gigs of RAM running at 4.03 gigahertz. So super fast, no issues whatsoever. Now, if you're using it for regular tasks such as music, you won't experience any issues, of course, because it's pretty minimal. But even exporting 4K video in comparisons, this is much faster even than the iPhone 14 Pro Max or 15 Pro Max. It's just super fast this year at exporting that video. Also, if we go into a game, maybe one we've had loaded recently, maybe Minecraft, it's already loaded, it resumes nice and fast, everything loads quickly, it's super smooth, and this can also be in 120 Hz if the game maker actually decides to do that. So in general, it runs AAA games such as Assassin's Creed Mirage and many others this time around without any issues. Using it for maybe something a little bit more intensive, I think the most intense thing you can do is probably record 4K 120 video, edit that, export it, and do a few things like that. But in general, it will heat the phone up a little bit, but nothing abnormal. And of course, probably the number one task that does that is going to be when you're using things such as Image Playground with iOS 18.2. Using this heats the phone up pretty quickly when you're using AI, just generating something, maybe we'll generate a few different things, a rainforest at sunset with myself, and you'll see I don't really care for Image Playground too much. I think it makes some odd and sometimes creepy images, but overall it does an okay job. Hopefully they'll improve it in the future. But the AI features, whether it's the newer version of Siri, some of it we're still waiting for, but cleanup in photos works well also. So if we go to cleanup, give it just a second to process, it says preparing cleanup. This will heat the phone up quite a bit. And sometimes this takes much longer than you would expect, but we'll give it a second here. Let's get rid of this phone. It will highlight it, and then it will get rid of it. So it takes just a second. It figures out what's going on, and this time it sort of blurred it. That's not what I was looking for. So we'll go back and see if we can maybe get rid of it that way and erase it. It realizes you're probably not wanting to delete that out of the scene, so it's a little bit odd to use this, but this definitely heats up the phone when you start to use that. Nothing unusual, not so hot that you can't touch the phone, but it's definitely getting warm. But again, Apple manages this and makes sure it's sort of within range. As far as iOS making this a better experience, I think it has gotten better as far as the overall battery. If we go ahead and take a look at the settings, we'll go into battery health, we're at normal still, 100% capacity, 79 cycles. You can see coconut battery here with additional details. And I run a lot of betas, so it says update finishing in the background. Because of that, battery life isn't going to be as good as it normally would, but you'll see yesterday I had 4 hours and 25 minutes of screen active time, 7 hours and 18 minutes of screen idle time, and used about maybe 80% of the battery. Depending on what version you're running, you'll see this one was even better with about the same amount of battery usage, 6 hours and 28 minutes. So it definitely seems to be getting better with the later software updates, and I think it's a big improvement this time around. But it's going to get better, hopefully, and really I think Apple needs to work on their software. That's probably the number one thing that affects the overall usability of this phone. It has gotten better, but it needs to get even better so it's less buggy. But I think the experience this year is pretty consistent. We're used to this phone at this point. Things haven't changed too much other than some customization in iOS 18, and I think the overall experience is what you would expect with an iPhone at this point. Again, I'd love to see Apple maybe upgrade it a little bit more, but at this point, if you're wondering if you should wait for maybe an iPhone 17 Pro or the iPhone 17 Air, if you don't have an upgrade and you don't really care about Apple Intelligence and you maybe have an iPhone 13 or 14, it's fine to wait at this point. I think we'll see some big improvements with the next version, and we do expect some sort of redesign. So based on that information, I would probably hold off on the upgrade of the next phone until the iPhone 17. The iPhone 16 Pro or Pro Max is a great choice if you have maybe an older phone, but if you're coming from the 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max, I would probably hold off at this point. Again, it's great as far as battery life and more, but I'd love to hear from you if you've been using an iPhone 16 Pro or 16 Pro Max, what you think of it in the comments below. I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do, and if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.